Chapter 1. The White Noise. Operator Kalen calling command. Priority Ultra. Signal check. Is anyone receiving Operator Kalen calling Colonel? Damn it. Is anyone still breathing? If you are hearing this recording, then the unthinkable has happened. My name is Kalen Designation Vox, Operator of the 104th, and I have made the greatest mistake of my life. I survived. You would have done the same, or perhaps you would have had the courage to die with the rest of them. I don't know which choice was the coward's way out yet. I am recording this because the silence is too loud. It presses against my eardrums harder than the pressure wave of the bombardment that buried us. If I keep talking, if I keep the magnetic tape spinning, then I am still a soldier. I am still functioning. If I stop, I am just another corpse that hasn't finished cooling down. The first thing I remember is the taste of copper and ash. It coated my tongue a gritty paste that felt like I had swallowed a handful of the ruined city itself. My eyes refused to focus. For a long time, there was only a gray blur, and the high-pitched ringing in my ears a singular piercing note that drowned out the world. I lay there staring up at a sky that was choked with smoke, watching the black clouds roil like bruised flesh. I didn't move. I couldn't remember how. The concept of limbs, of fingers and toes felt alien, as if my consciousness had been severed from the meat of my body. Slowly the sensation returned, not as relief, but as pain. A dull, throbbing ache in my ribs, the sharp sting of lacerations on my face, and the crushing weight of the slab of rockcrete pinning my left leg. I pushed the debris off. It slid away with a grinding sound that echoed too loudly in the stillness. I sat up, gasping for air that smelled of ozone and cooked meat. My hands immediately went to my chest, checking the equipment, before I even checked my own blood. The Vox caster. It was still strapped to me, a heavy metal carapace that felt like a second spine. It was dented, the paint scorched, but the green rune on the power cell was glowing faint and steady. It was the only light in the gloom. I adjusted the dials with trembling fingers, seeking a frequency, seeking a voice, seeking anything that wasn't this terrible, suffocating quiet. I needed an order. I needed someone to tell me where to stand and what to shoot. Without an order, I was just a man alone in the dark, and that terrified me more than the enemy. There was a crackle in the earpiece. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that hurt. I froze, pressing the receiver against my skull until the plastic bit into my skin. Alpha 1 report. I whispered, my voice raspy and broken. This is Kalen. Report. For a second, I thought I heard a response, a low murmur, a human cadence buried under the static. I scrambled over the rubble, sliding down a mound of shattered glass and twisted rebar following the phantom signal. I needed it to be the sergeant. I needed it to be the medic. I would have settled for the terrifying bark of the commissar. Anyone. But as I tuned the frequency, the voice resolved. It wasn't a survivor. It was a feedback loop, a ghost echo of a transmission sent hours ago bouncing off the atmospheric interference. Just a fragment of a scream caught in the machine, playing over and over. I turned the volume down, but I didn't turn it off. I couldn't bear the true silence. I made my way toward the command bunker, or what was left of it. The landscape had changed. The map in my head was useless now. Landmarks had been erased, streets turned into canyons of debris. I walked past them. The regiment. They were everywhere. They didn't look like heroes. They looked like discarded dolls, broken and tossed aside by a bored child. I didn't look at their faces. I looked at their rank insignia, their unit patches. I was looking for authority. I was looking for the chain of command, because without the chain, there is nothing holding reality together. I found the colonel half buried under a collapsed wall. I knew it was him by the glint of the power sword that lay deactivated near his hand. He wasn't moving. I knelt beside him, my movements mechanical, driven by the drill and discipline beaten into me at the Shola. "Sir," I said. "Operator Kalen reporting for duty." He didn't answer. His eyes were open, staring at the dust motes, dancing in the air coated in a film of gray powder. There was no grandeur in his death, no final heroic pose. He looked small. I reached out and checked for a pulse at his neck, pressing my fingers into the cold, stiff flesh. Nothing. The cold wasn't just physical. It felt like a void opening up beneath me. The man who held our lives in his hands was gone, and he had taken the purpose of the 104th with him. I stood up, wiping my hand on my fatigues. The grease and blood left a dark smear. I unclamped the data slate from my belt. It was a heavy, archaic device, built to survive things that flesh could not. I connected it to the Colonel's personal Vox link, overriding the security protocols with the emergency codes. I needed a head count. I needed to know the strength of the unit. The machine hummed a comforting, logical sound. The screen flickered to life, green text scrolling rapidly as it pinged every active transponder in the designated zone. I watched the numbers. Total unit strength, 5,000 tullers. Active transponders. The number spun, calculating, searching. I held my breath. The wind howled through the ruins, a mournful sound that tore at my uniform. The number stopped. It blinked once, twice, mocking me with its absolute, unfeeling precision. Active transponders. 1. It was just me. The logic of the machine was undeniable. There was no one left to give orders. No one left to take them. I was the last component of a machine that had already been scrapped. The data slate screen glowed in the twilight, illuminating the dust around me. I stared at that single digit, wishing it would change, wishing it would glitch. It didn't. The silence stayed. Chapter 2. The Protocol. The Departamento Munitorum Field Manual. Volume 49 Section 9, Subsection 4, clearly states the procedure for post-engagement casualty verification. It does not use words like grief or mourning. It uses words like asset recovery, identification, harvesting, and reallocation of resources. I know this section by heart. I recited it under my breath as I moved through the wreckage, using the dry, legalistic text to build a wall between my mind and the reality of what I was doing. If I was just following procedure, then I wasn't walking through a graveyard of my friends. I was just a clerk, processing a warehouse error. I was just correcting the inventory. I started with the nearest body. It was a trooper from 3rd Platoon. I didn't recognize his face, too much damage from the shrapnel, but the number stamped on his shoulder guard was legible. I reached down, my finger stiff and clumsy, and found the chain around his neck. The metal tags were cold, colder than the air, colder than his skin. They felt greasy. I snapped the chain with a sharp tug, a practiced motion that felt obscene in its efficiency. I held them up to the dim light. Name, rank, serial number, blood type. A human life compressed into 4 lines of stamped plasteel. I dropped them into the empty ammunition pouch at my hip. They made a small, flat clinking sound. It was the sound of a coin dropping into a beggar's cup. 1 down, 4,999 to go. The work was slow. It was methodical. It was horrific in its banality. I moved from one corpse to the next, a scavenger beetle in the carcass of a giant beast. With every tag I collected, the pouch at my hip grew heavier. It began to drag against my leg, a physical weight of dead men that threw off my balance. I found myself checking their gear, not for sentimental reasons, but for functionality. Standard issue lays gun barrel warped, flak armor compromised, ration packs contaminated. The Munitorum would be displeased. This was a total write-off. I caught myself imagining the paperwork, the Form 72B loss of material reports I would have to file. I imagined a scribe on Terra light years away, stamping rejected on a file with red ink, annoyed that we had died so inefficiently. After an hour, the pile of bodies seemed to grow rather than shrink. The devastation was fractal. The closer I looked, the more death I saw. Limbs protruded from the rubble like twisted rebar. Helmets stared up from the mud, empty or occupied, it was hard to tell. I stopped near the remains of a Chimera transport. The metal hull was still ticking as it cooled, the smell of burnt promethium, thick and cloying. There was a body slumped against the tracks. I knew this one. It was Harlan. We had shared recaf 2 nights ago. He had complained about the taste, said it tasted like engine oil. I looked at his face now. He looked surprised. I reached for his tags, but my hand stopped. My pouch was full. It was bulging, the metal tags grinding against each other with every step I took like a bag of loose change. I looked at Harlan, then at the sea of bodies stretching out into the gloom. I couldn't do it. I couldn't carry them all. The manual said every tag must be retrieved. The manual said the Emperor knows his own, but the Administratum needs proof. But the manual didn't account for this. It didn't account for the sheer, crushing volume of failure. I realized then that we weren't soldiers to the people who sent us here. We were just a batch number. And this batch was defective. You don't inventory broken stock. You liquidate it. I left Harlan's tags around his neck. I left the others too. I only kept the ones I had already taken a random sampling of the dead. It felt like a betrayal, a second death I was inflicting on them. By leaving them, I was erasing them from the record. They would be listed as missing in action forever ghosts, drifting in the bureaucratic void never granted the finality of confirmed deceased. I stood up, my knees, cracking the weight of the half-filled pouch, slapping against my thigh. I felt sick, a deep churning nausea that had nothing to do with the gore and everything to do with the numbers. I was just a lingering, rounding error. I adjusted the Voxcaster on my back, the hum of the machine a constant, irritating companion. I was about to switch frequencies to try the emergency band again when the static changed. It wasn't the white noise of the atmosphere anymore. It was rhythmic, a carrier wave, then a sound, sharp, distinct. Click. I froze. The sound came from my earpiece, clear as a bell. It was the sound of a transmitter keying open. A channel had been established. I didn't breathe. I didn't speak. I waited, my hand hovering over the transmit button, shaking slightly. Interference, confirmed a voice said. It wasn't human. It was synthesized flat, stripped of all inflection and warmth. It sounded like a cogitator reading a list of ingredients. Background radiation within acceptable tolerance. Biological matter density high. I pressed the receiver to my ear, straining to hear. Was this rescue? Was this a salvage team? Scan complete, the voice continued. It was so loud in my ear, yet I knew the source could be miles away. Single active biosign detected in Sector 4. Identity unclassified. Status irregular. My blood ran cold. Unclassified. Not survivor. Not friendly. Unclassified. In the lexicon of the Imperium, unclassified things were dangerous. Unclassified things were to be purged. Target is aware, the voice said, and for a terrifying second, I thought it was speaking directly to me. Mark for sterilization. Continue inventory. Click. The line went dead. The static rushed back in, but the silence was gone. I wasn't alone in the ruins. Something else was here. Something that looked at a battlefield of 5,000 dead men and saw only a mess that needed cleaning up. I looked down at the pouch of dog tags. They suddenly felt very light, insignificant against the weight of the gaze that had just swept over me. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was debris, and the sweepers were coming. Chapter 3 System Error. I needed a stronger signal. My portable Voxcaster was just a whisper in a hurricane, unable to pierce the ionic interference hanging over the city like a shroud. I needed to scream. The wreckage of a Lehman Russ battle tank, the Iron Will, sat tilted in a crater 50 meters away. It was a blackened husk, its turret blown clean off, but the hull's comms array might still have power. I dragged a spool of heavy-gauge cabling behind me, the copper wire weighing me down like a convict's chain. Every step was a negotiation with the rubble. I slipped on spent shell casings and slid through mud made of pulverized brick and fluids I didn't want to identify. The air was getting hotter, or maybe it was just the fever of exhaustion setting in. Climbing the tank felt like scaling a dead beast. The metal was still radiating heat, hot enough to blister skin through my gloves. I found the external hardline port near the engine block. It was fused shut with slag. I had to pry it open with my combat knife, snapping the blade tip in the process. I didn't care. I jammed the connector and praying to the machine spirit that there was still a spark of life in the tank's capacitors. The connection light on my data slate blinked. Once, twice. Then it held steady. Amber. Low power, but enough. I wasn't just a man anymore. I was now an antenna for the dead. I typed the message with shaking hands. I didn't trust my voice to hold steady, so I used text. It was safer. Cleaner. Sender Vox Operator Kalen of 104th Cadian. Recipient Munitorum Command Sector High Command. Subject Post-Mortem. Report Extraction. Request. Message Regiment destroyed. Total casualty rate 100%. Sole survivor at coordinates 45 Alpha. Requesting immediate evac. Over. I hit send. The screen displayed a spinning Aquila, the double-headed eagle, cycling endlessly as the data packet was beamed up through the smoke, past the atmosphere to the orbital grid. I stared at the spinning icon. It was the only moving thing in the world. The response came back in less than 10 seconds. It was too fast. A human officer would have hesitated. A human would have asked for confirmation. A human would have been horrified. The machine simply replied. Error 404, invalid data. Processing request denied. Reason logistical mismatch, query result. Regiment 104 is listed as successfully withdrawn. Current status in transit to staging area Beta 9. Casualty rate 0%. I stared at the screen. I wiped the dust off the glass with my thumb, thinking I had misread it. I read it again. Casualty rate 0%. The green text glowed with absolute mathematical certainty. According to the Administratum's database, the 104th was currently sitting on a transport ship eating rations and cleaning their weapons safe in the void. According to the system, the battle hadn't happened. Or if it had, we weren't part of it. The reality of the database had superseded the reality of the flesh. I looked up from the screen. I looked at the crater. I looked at the body of the Iron Will's driver fused to his seat by the heat of the meltablast that had killed him. I looked at the thousands of unburied men rotting in the wind. "You're not dead," I whispered to them. "The computer says you're safe." But they didn't move. They didn't cheer. If the regiment was safe, then who were these people? To the Imperium, they were no longer soldiers. They were unauthorized biomass. They were matter out of place. And I wasn't a survivor waiting for rescue. I was a glitch. I was a clerical error standing in the middle of a blank space on the map. The screen flickered one last time before the tank's battery died, plunging me back into the gray twilight. Transmission ends. Chapter 4. The Black Ships. Hunger is a traitor. It doesn't care that your world has ended. It doesn't care that you are standing in a slaughterhouse. It simply demands to be fed. My stomach cramped a sharp, twisting pain that forced me to stop my aimless wandering. I knelt beside a fallen trooper from the logistics corps. I didn't look at his face. I had stopped looking at faces an hour ago, but I rifled through his webbing with the desperation of a thief. I found a bar of corpse starch wrapped in foil. It was lukewarm, heated by the decay of the body it had rested against. I tore the wrapper open with my teeth and bit down. It tasted of nothing. Just processed carbohydrates and recycled protein, a bland gray paste that coated the roof of my mouth. I chewed mechanically, staring at the horizon. I was eating the dead to survive the dead. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I swallowed it down anyway. While chewing, my eyes caught the edge of a small leather-bound book tucked into the trooper's breast pocket. It was unauthorized. Personal effects were discouraged, but everyone had them. I pulled it out. The pages were crinkled from sweat and stained with dirt, but the ink was legible. It was a diary. Private Jensen. I remembered him. He was a kid who collected shell casings. I flipped to the last entry dated 2 days before the end. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. "The sky is wrong," it read. "The Vox officers say it's atmospheric interference, but I saw them. Through the macro binoculars. Ships, not Navy cruisers. These were black. Void black. No markings. They are just sitting in high orbit directly above us. They aren't deploying drop pods. They are just watching." I closed the book. Black ships. The Inquisition. The stories whispered in the barracks at night, the ones the commissars would shoot you for repeating. The black ships didn't come for reinforcements. They came for containment. They came when a planet was sick, not with invasion, but with heresy. I looked up at the sky. The smoke obscured everything now, but the knowledge settled in my gut, heavier than the ration I had just eaten. They had been there the whole time. They had watched us dig our trenches. They had watched us calibrate our guns. And they had done nothing. Why deploy a regiment just to watch it die from orbit? I stood up and walked to the edge of the nearest impact crater. It was a massive gouge in the earth, easily 20 meters wide. I looked at the spray pattern of the debris. I looked at the angle of the furrow where the shell had struck. I am a Vox operator. I deal in coordinates. I deal in vectors. I trace the trajectory back in my mind. If the enemy had fired this, the angle would have been acute coming from the north. But the furrow was deep on the southern side. The ejecta was thrown forward toward the enemy lines. My breath hitched. I walked to another crater. Same pattern. And another. The artillery hadn't come from the enemy. It had come from behind us. It had come from our own rear guard, or perhaps from the orbit where those black ships hung. They hadn't been overwhelmed. They hadn't missed. They had targeted us. The wind picked up a sudden howling gale that carried the taste of salt and iron. A dust storm was rolling in from the wastes, a towering wall of brown particulate matter that swallowed the ruins whole. It hit me a moment later, stinging my exposed skin to bring me to close my eyes. It was burying the bodies. It was smoothing over the craters. Nature was colluding with the Imperium to hide the evidence. I shoved Jensen's diary into my pocket. It wasn't just a book anymore. It was proof. We weren't casualties of war. We were the targets. The storm screamed around me, erasing the world, erasing the dead trying to erase me. I turned my collar up and began to walk. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. The dead were quiet, but the silence they left behind was starting to scream. Chapter 5. The Shelter. The storm wasn't just wind and sand. It was a physical assault, a grinder meant to strip the meat from the bone. Visibility dropped to 0. I stumbled blindly through the howling dark, my boots slipping on loose scree, my hands grasping for anything solid. I found a wall rough and cold and followed it until my fingers brushed against the shattered remains of a heavy oak door. I threw myself inside, collapsing onto a floor of cracked marble. The wind roared outside, frustrated that it couldn't follow. but inside the air was still. It was a basilica, or the skeleton of one. The roof was gone, leaving the nave open to the angry sky, but the walls held. Statues of saints looked down from the alcoves, their stone faces chipped and scarred by shrapnel, their hands raised in blessings that had failed to save anyone. I crawled deeper into the shadows, wedging myself behind the fallen plinth of a statue. I needed to clear my filters. My rebreather was clogged with dust, making every breath a labor. I was scraping the intake valve with my combat knife when I saw it. It was lying in the dust just a few feet away, catching the faint gray light filtering down from above. It was a shell casing, but it wasn't standard issue. It wasn't the cheap, mass-produced brass of a laser gun power pack or the heavy slug of a bolter. It was sleek, high-grade metal still smelling faintly of ozone and expensive coolant. A hellgun casing, the kind used by the elite, the kind used by stormtroopers. My heart hammered against my ribs. Stormtroopers didn't get deployed for trench warfare. They were precision instruments. They were the scalpel, not the hammer. If they were here, it meant there was a target of high value, or a problem that required absolute discretion. I heard the sound then. It wasn't the wind. It was the rhythmic, heavy crunch of ceramite boots on stone. Not a shuffle. A march. Controlled. Disciplined. I pressed my face to a crack in the plinth, peering out into the nave. Two figures emerged from the gloom of the entrance. They were silhouettes of void black armor, bulky and terrifying. They moved with a synchronized fluidity that was almost robotic. As they stepped into a patch of light, I saw their helmets. They were fashioned into the likeness of grinning chrome skulls with glowing red lenses for eyes. The Tempestus Scions, the Inquisition's personal cleanup crew. They held their hellguns at the low ready, scanning the room with mechanical precision. One of them stopped by a pile of rags, a refugee, or maybe a wounded soldier who had crawled here to die. The figure didn't check for a pulse. It didn't offer water. It simply raised the hellgun. There was a sharp hiss of ionized air, a flash of red light, and the pile of rags stopped moving forever. The stormtrooper lowered the weapon and moved on, scanning the next sector. It wasn't combat. It was sanitation. They weren't here to hold the line. They were here to erase the line and everyone who had stood on it. I stopped breathing. I became part of the stone. I realized then that the monsters weren't coming from the sky or the warp. They were wearing the aquila on their chests, and I was just a stain on the floor they hadn't scrubbed yet. Chapter 6. Forbidden Memory. My hands know the lasgun better than they know my own face. In the pitch black of the crypt, sight is useless, but touch is absolute. I stripped the weapon down to its base components. The spring, the slide, the barrel, the power pack. Click. Slide. Snap! The sound was rhythmic, a mechanical lullaby that I used to drown out the terror. But as my fingers traced the cold metal of the firing mechanism, the rhythm changed. It synced with a different memory, pulling me back to a moment I hadn't realized was the beginning of the end. The darkness of the crypt dissolved, replaced by the harsh, sterile light of the command tent 3 days ago. I was there to fix a faulty Vox link. I was supposed to be invisible, just a technician in the background. The colonel was there, standing over the hololith table. He looked tired. Not just sleep-deprived, but spiritually exhausted, his face gray and drawn. Across from him stood the advisor. I never saw his face. It was hidden beneath a hood of heavy oil-stained velvet. He didn't wear a uniform. He wore the sigil of the Inquisition pinned to his chest, like a judgment. They weren't discussing tactics. They were arguing over a crate. It sat in the center of the room, sealed with stasis locks and purity seals that looked fresh. "It is unstable," the colonel had said, his voice tight. "My men are soldiers, not tech priests. We cannot transport this. The radiation alone is bleeding through the containment field." The advisor didn't move. He didn't gesture. He just stood there, a void in the room. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding stones. The asset is secured. Your men are expendable. The artifact is not. I had looked at the crate then. It was open just a crack. Inside there was an object. It was a geometric shape, a polyhedron of some kind. But it was wrong. It didn't reflect the light of the tent. It drank it. It was a hole in reality, a piece of solid darkness that hurt to look at. I remembered the sensation clearly even now, in the cold dark of the shelter. A low-frequency hum emanated from that box. It wasn't a sound you heard. It was a sound you felt in the marrow of your bones. In the tent, my nose had started to bleed. I had wiped it away, thinking it was just the dry air of the wastes. But then I saw the colonel's ear, a trickle of dark crimson running down his neck. The object was killing us, just by existing near us. It was broadcasting a signal that human biology rejected. The advisor didn't bleed. He just watched the colonel with that terrifying, passive patience. The extraction will proceed, the advisor said. You will hold the line until the black ships arrive. Then you will be relieved. Snap. The bolt carrier slid back into place in my hands. The memory faded, leaving me shivering in the present. I understood now. I understood the artillery. I understood the silence. We weren't a regiment defending a strategic point. We were a biological containment shield. We were the lead box used to transport radioactive material. And when you transport hazardous waste, you don't keep the box. You bury it. We were never meant to leave this planet. We had seen the geometry of the forbidden. We had bled from its song. That was the infection. And the cure was total sterilization. I finished reassembling the rifle. It was complete. A useless tool against orbital bombardment, but a comfort nonetheless. I held it close to my chest, the metal absorbing my body heat. Above me, through the layers of stone and reinforced concrete, I heard a sound. It was heavy, metallic, clanking. It wasn't the wind. It was footsteps. Heavy magnetic boots walking on the roof of my tomb. They were scanning. They were hunting. And for the first time, I didn't pray for rescue. I prayed that the darkness would keep drinking the light just like the artifact, and hide me within its belly. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Dust trickled down onto my face. I didn't blink. The silence returned, but this time it was waiting. Chapter 7. Surgery. Pain is a warning system. It tells you something is wrong. But when everything is wrong, pain becomes background noise, just another static frequency in your head. I sat in the corner of the cellar, the light of a single chemical flare, casting long, shivering shadows against the damp brick. My left leg was throbbing. It wasn't the sharp, honest sting of a fresh cut. It was a dull, hot pressure that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I peeled back the fabric of my fatigues. The cloth was stuck, fused to the skin by dried blood and pus. I ripped it away. The sound was like tearing wet paper. The wound was ugly. A jagged tear from a piece of shrapnel I hadn't even felt enter me. The edges were angry and red, the center black and weeping. It smelled sweet, like overripe fruit left in the sun. Infection. The invisible enemy that has killed more guardsmen than bolters ever have. I looked at it, detached, as if I were inspecting a faulty servo motor. If I left it, the rot would spread. It would eat the muscle, then the bone, then the blood. I would die of fever in the dark, shivering while my body cooked itself. There was no medic. There was no anesthetic. There was only me, a combat knife, and a lighter. I heated the blade until the metal turned a dull, sullen orange. The flame hissed, burning through the last of my promethium fuel. I put a strip of leather belt between my teeth. I didn't want to bite my tongue off. I didn't want to make a sound. Sound is a beacon. I lowered the knife. The first touch was a shock, a sudden invasion of heat that made my leg jerk involuntarily. I clamped my hand down on my thigh, forcing it still. I had to be precise. I had to be the surgeon and the patient. I cut. The skin parted. The smell of burning meat filled the small space, mixing with the smell of the rot. It made me gag, but I didn't stop. I dug the tip of the knife in, searching for the dead tissue, carving it out like a sculptor correcting a flaw in the stone. As I worked, the pain became a white blindness. In that blindness, I heard the commissar's voice. It was a memory from the training grounds of the Shola years ago. He was pacing the line, his black coat flapping in the wind. Weakness is a disease. He had shouted, his voice amplifying over the Vox speakers. Doubt is a gangrene of the soul. You do not treat it. You do not negotiate with it. You cut it out. You burn it away until only the pure iron of duty remains. I sliced a chunk of blackened flesh and flicked it onto the floor. Is this what we were? Just necrotic tissue on the body of the Imperium? Was the regiment the rot, and the black ships the scalpel? I finished. The wound was raw, bleeding clean red blood, now the black corruption gone. I poured the last of the medicinal alcohol over it. The sting was absolute, a blinding flash that cleared my vision. I wrapped the leg tightly with a strip of cloth torn from my uniform. I spat the leather belt out. My jaw ached. I leaned back against the wall, sweat dripping from my nose, my breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. I had survived the surgery. I had cut out the weakness. But looking at the bloody mess on the floor, I didn't feel pure. I felt hollowed out. I reached for my data slate to log the medical usage, a habit I couldn't break. The screen flickered, displaying the local tactical map I had downloaded from the tank. It showed the sector grid. A red circle encompassed my position. It wasn't marked as contacted or lost. It was marked with a single high Gothic rune, Exterminatus Zone Primus. I stared at the rune. It wasn't a battlefield map. It was a demolition schematic. I wasn't just a soldier behind enemy lines. I was a microbe sitting in the center of a sterilization field. I closed my eyes. The pain in my leg was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty. They hadn't just killed us. They had erased the coordinates where we stood. Chapter 8. The Trap of Silence. Silence is a weapon. In the Shola, they taught us that silence is discipline, that it is the shield of the ambusher. But they never taught us what silence feels like when it is absolute. Down here in the dark, buried under tons of rock and history, the silence isn't passive. It is aggressive. It presses against my eardrums like deep water. It creeps into my mind, filling the spaces where orders and camaraderie used to be. I could hear the blood rushing through my veins, a deafening hydraulic hiss. I could hear the friction of my own eyelids blinking. It was maddening. A soldier is defined by the noise of war. Without the roar of the bolter or the scream of the jet engine, I felt like I was fading, dissolving into the background radiation of the universe. I looked at the Voxcaster sitting next to me. The green power rune was dim, indicating standby mode. It was the only thing in the room that felt alive. My hand hovered over the activation dial. I knew the protocol. Radio silence is the first rule of survival behind enemy lines. To transmit is to die. To receive is to reveal. But the logic of survival was losing the war against the terror of isolation. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't expect a rescue. I just wanted to hear the static. I wanted that comforting, meaningless wash of white noise that proved the galaxy was still turning, that the machine spirits were still singing, that I wasn't the last conscious thought in an empty cosmos. My fingers betrayed me. They moved with the twitchy desperation of an addict. I clicked the dial one notch to the right. Click. The speaker crackled. It was a soft sound, a wash of gray static like the sound of distant rain on a tin roof. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the metal casing, letting the noise wash over me. It was beautiful. It drowned out the ringing in my ears. It drowned out the memory of the dead faces outside. For a moment, I wasn't hunted. I was just an operator on a quiet night watch, lulled by the rhythm of the atmosphere. I let my guard down. I let myself breathe. The static cut out. It didn't fade. It was severed. A new sound replaced it, a sharp digital chirp that spiked the audio visualizer on the console. Then the voice. It wasn't the looped warning from before. It was immediate. It was present. Unauthorized carrier wave detected, the voice rasped. It sounded like metal scraping on bone. Signal source triangulation complete. Sector 4, Gamma, sub-level 3. I stared at the box in horror. I hadn't transmitted anything. I had only listened. But the receiver itself had leaked enough energy, a tiny passive electronic signature, that their cogitators had sniffed out of the background noise. Target isolated. The voice continued. Converge and sterilize. I slammed the power switch off, plunging the room back into silence. But the silence was different now. It wasn't empty anymore. It was pregnant with threat. I had lit a flare in a dark room to see where I was, and in doing so, I had shown the monsters exactly where to bite. I grabbed my laser gun and scrambled to my feet, ignoring the screaming pain in my leg. The silence was no longer a cage, it was a hunting ground, and I had just rung the dinner bell. Chapter 9, Cat and Mouse. I moved through the carcass of the munitions factory, a vast, hollowed-out cathedral of industry, where the shadows were deep enough to drown in. The air here was different. It tasted of stale grease and ancient chemical spills, a sharp contrast to the corpse smell outside. I kept to the high ground, navigating the rusted gantries that crisscrossed the assembly floor like a spiderweb. My breathing was shallow, controlled a rhythm I forced my lungs to maintain, despite the panic clawing at my throat. Below me in the gloom of the production lines, they were moving. I couldn't hear their footsteps. Their armor was dampened, their discipline absolute, but I could feel their presence. It was a pressure in the air, a displacement of the dust. They were sweeping the sector grid by grid, closing the net with the inevitability of a hydraulic press. I froze as a beam of light cut through the darkness. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a coherent beam of red laser light, thin as a razor wire, scanning the walkway ahead of me. It moved with unnatural smoothness, tracing the contours of the machinery, searching for heat, for movement, for life. I pressed myself flat against a cold generator housing my heart, hammering against the metal plating so hard I was sure the vibrations would give me away. I was trapped. The laser was sweeping closer, intersecting my path. To move forward was to be seen. To retreat was to back into their kill zone. I was a rat in a maze that had suddenly run out of corners. My hand brushed against something soft in the dark. Fabric, armor, flesh. I turned my head slowly. Lying next to the generator was the body of a loader, a young man from the 4th platoon. He had died, curled up likely from blood loss, his face pale and peaceful in the shadows. For a moment I felt a pang of sorrow, a flickering candle of human empathy. But then I looked at the laser beam inching closer now, only a few meters away. The sorrow vanished, extinguished by a cold reptilian logic. He wasn't a man anymore. He was mass. He was an object with thermal residue. He was a distraction. I grabbed the straps of his webbing. He was heavy, dead weight in the truest sense, but fear gave me strength. I didn't say a prayer. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I waited for the laser to sweep away for a fraction of a second, and then I shoved. I pushed him hard, sending him tumbling over the railing of the gantry. He fell silently for a heartbeat, then crashed onto the metal roofing of a conveyor belt below. The sound was deafening in the silence, a wet, heavy thud, followed by the clatter of loose gear. The reaction was instantaneous. 3 laser sights snapped toward the sound. The darkness below erupted in stroboscopic flashes of hellgun fire. I didn't watch. I didn't look to see what the high-energy beams were doing to the body of my comrade. I used the noise, the chaos, the split second, where their attention was focused on the dead to run. I scrambled up a maintenance ladder, hauling myself into the ventilation shafts, just as the firing stopped. I lay there in the cramped, dusty dark, listening. Target neutralized, a voice intoned from below, resuming scan. They had killed him again. And I lay there, my pulse slowing, realizing with a sickening jolt that I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved. The dead had served the living one last time. Chapter 10. Cornered Beast. The sewers were a labyrinth of dripping brick and foul water, a subterranean gut that digested the city's waste. Now, it was digesting me. I waded through waist-deep runoff that smelled of chemical sludge and decay, the cold seep of the filth numbing my legs. But the cold was my only ally. Above the waterline, the air was warm and humid, perfect for the thermal sensors hunting me. I could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of a servo skull drifting through the tunnels behind me. It was a hunter-killer variant equipped with auspex arrays that could detect a heartbeat through a meter of concrete. I had nowhere to go. The tunnel ahead ended in a rusted grate that was welded shut. The tunnel behind was filled with the red gaze of the machine. I was trapped in a stone bottle, and the cork was being pushed in. I scrambled up a slick embankment into a dry overflow alcove, desperate for a place to hide my heat signature. I wasn't alone. In the shadows, something stirred. It was a heavy loader servitor, a lobotomized cyborg designed for hauling munitions crates. It had been torn in half by an explosion, its lower torso missing, dragging itself blindly with hydraulic claw arms. It was making a low, wet, gurgling sound. Its organic components were failing. Its skin was gray and clammy, its body temperature dropping rapidly as it bled out. To the sensors, it would look like a fading ghost, easily ignored. It wasn't enough to be a decoy, it was just debris. Unless I changed the variables. I looked at the cyborg. It had no mind, no soul, just a collection of programmed reflexes and biological wetware. I reached into my medkit and pulled out a combat stim injector. It was a red vial, pure Frenzen, and adrenaline designed to keep a soldier fighting even after his legs had been blown off. It was a lifeline. It was supposed to be for me. I looked at the servitor, then at the injector. If I used it on myself, I might run faster, but I would burn hotter. If I used it on it, I didn't hesitate. I wasn't saving a life. I was calibrating a piece of equipment. I jammed the needle into the servitor's neck, right into the thick artery, and depressed the plunger. The effect was immediate and violent. The cyborg arched its back, its hydraulic arms slamming against the stone with the force of a pile driver. The gurgle turned into a high-pitched mechanical shriek. Its heart, previously a fluttering bird, began to hammer like a piston engine. I could hear it thumping against its ribcage, a frantic, desperate rhythm. The rush of blood flushed its skin red. Its temperature spiked. To a thermal sensor, it was no longer dying trash. It was a panicked, adrenaline-fueled combatant preparing to ambush. I scrambled backward, sliding into the dark water, submerging myself up to my nose. I drifted into the shadows, letting the cold filth mask me. The servitor thrashed and screamed in the alcove, a beacon of noise and heat. A moment later, the darkness at the end of the tunnel was pierced by searchlights. Contact front, a voice barked, distorted by a Vox grill. Target aggressive. Bio readings critical. The stormtroopers didn't ask for surrender. They opened fire. The tunnel lit up with the strobe light intensity of hellgun discharge. The servitors' screams were cut short by the wet tearing of meat and the spark of ruptured cybernetics. "Target neutralized," the voice said, calm and professional. "Resume sweep." They moved past my hiding spot, boots splashing in the water focused entirely on the smoking heap of metal and flesh I had left for them. I waited until the lights faded around the bend. I dragged myself out of the water shivering. I hadn't just sacrificed an ally. Servitors aren't people, I told myself, but I had used the very medicine meant to save life as a tool to manufacture a more convincing death. I checked my pulse. It was steady. Too steady. That scared me more than the dark. Chapter 11. The Naked Truth. I found the Major in the remains of the communications trench. He wasn't buried like the others. He was sitting upright against the sandbags, his cap pulled low over his eyes, his hands resting on his knees. From a distance, he looked like he was sleeping, taking a moment of respite before the next wave. Up close, the illusion shattered. His chest was a ruin of scorched meat, the telltale burn of a high-yield plasma pistol. The weapon lay in the mud beside him. It was his own sidearm. He hadn't been killed by the enemy, and he hadn't been killed by the cleanup crew. He had done it himself. He had looked at something on the data slate clutched in his stiff, cold fingers and decided that a plasma bolt to the heart was a better option than waiting. I pried the slate from his grip. Rigor mortis fought me, the dead man unwilling to share his final secret, but I broke his fingers one by one. Snap! 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 The sound was dry, like stepping on twigs. I wiped the screen with my sleeve. It was a command-level device encrypted with a Rosette cipher that would burn out the brain of anyone trying to brute force it. But I wasn't trying to break in. I was just bypassing the biolock. I used a trick a tech priest had shown me once in exchange for a bottle of Amasec, shorting the logic gates with a combat knife. The machine spirit protested, sparking and hissing, but the screen flickered to life. The file was already open. It was the last thing the Major had read before he pulled the trigger. It wasn't a battle plan. It wasn't a map. It was a receipt. Clearance Vermilion. Operation Silent Night. Subject Artifact Omega Recovery. Status Containment Breach. Directive Total Purge. No witnesses. No survivors. Asset Denial Authorized. Authorization Inquisitor X. The words floated in the green glow of the screen, burning themselves into my retinas. I scrolled down. There was a timeline. Day 1. Deployment of 104th Regiment as biological buffer. Day 3. Artifact destabilization confirmed. Day 4. Black ships positioned in high orbit. Day 5. Artillery bombardment of friendly positions initiated. Day 6. Cleanup teams deployed. I lowered the slate. The pieces fell into place with the sickening clarity of a puzzle solved too late. The artifact in the crate, the nosebleeds, the atmospheric interference that blocked our calls for help, the artillery hitting us from the rear. We weren't the heroes holding the line against the darkness. We were the line. We were the meat shield thrown onto a grenade to dampen the blast. The Imperium hadn't failed us. It had used us exactly as intended. We were never meant to win. We were meant to die so that a secret could remain kept. I looked at the Major's corpse again. I understood his choice now. To die by your own hand is to reclaim a fraction of control. It is to say no. But as I stood there, the wind whipping the dust around my legs, I didn't feel the urge to join him. The fear that had driven me through the sewers, the panic that had made me sacrifice the servitor, it evaporated. It was replaced by something cold and hard, a block of ice settling in my chest. If I was just a number to them, just a loose end to be snipped off, then I refused to make it easy. I refused to be a polite victim. I holstered the data slate. I didn't delete the file. I encrypted it with my own codes, locking it down. It was no longer just intelligence, it was ammunition. I checked my laser gun. I checked my knife. I checked the grenades I had scavenged. They wanted a purge. They wanted to scrub the slate clean. Fine. But I was going to make sure the stain I left behind was permanent. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was a saboteur. I was the cancer they had failed to cut out. And now I was going to spread. Chapter 12, Weaponizing. The Munitorum Field Manual teaches you to field strip a laser gun in under 30 seconds. It is a drill designed to turn clumsy recruits into efficient soldiers, ensuring that even in the pitch black of a trench, you can fix a jam and keep firing. I sat in the shadows of the corridor, my hands moving with that same practiced automatic speed. But I wasn't cleaning a weapon. I was breaking one. I held a standard-issue power pack in my lap. It was fully charged, a brick of condensed energy capable of firing 100 shots. Or if you crossed the intake regulator with a copper wire and cracked the thermal shielding, it was a bomb capable of vaporizing a 3-meter radius. It took me 20 seconds, 10 seconds faster than the manual. I placed the unstable battery gently on the floor, hidden beneath a pile of rubble, and covered it with dust. I needed a trigger. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the handful of dog tags I had collected hours ago. The metal discs felt heavy and greasy in my hand. I had taken them to remember the dead to honor their service. Now they were just conductive material. I strung the metal chain across the hallway ankle height, tying it taut between two rusted pipes. It was a crude tripwire. When the chain was pulled, it would complete the circuit on the exposed battery contacts. The names of the dead Private Harlan Sergeant Miller Corporal Cade would literally be the spark that killed the enemy. There was a grim efficiency to it that I think the colonel would have appreciated. We were finally striking back. I retreated down the hall, melting into an alcove 50 meters away. I didn't have to wait long. The stormtroopers were disciplined, but they were arrogant. They relied on their superior tech, their thermal optics, and auspex scanners. But a thermal scanner doesn't pick up a cold battery until it goes critical. I heard the heavy rhythmic tread of boots. Clank, clank, clank. The lead trooper rounded the corner. He was moving fast, his hell gun raised, scanning the upper corners for a sniper. He didn't look down. He didn't see the thin silver glint of the chain. His boot caught the wire. The explosion was deafening. It wasn't the dull thump of a frag grenade. It was the sharp cracking snap of superheated ozone. A flash of blinding white light filled the corridor, bleaching the shadows out of existence for a split second. Then came the scream. It was a sound that transcended training and conditioning. The trooper lay in the ruin of the hallway, his left leg gone from the knee, down the armor fused to the cauterized stump. He was thrashing his helmet amplifier, broadcasting his agony to the entire sector. I raised my laser gun, lining up the sights on his head. It would be a mercy kill, a single shot to end the pain. My finger tightened on the trigger. Then I stopped. I lowered the weapon. The scream echoed through the complex, a raw, terrifying siren. Other footsteps were hurrying towards us. His squad was coming to help him. The noise was drawing them in, pulling them out of their secure formations, making them rush, making them sloppy. I watched the wounded man writhe. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel pity. I felt like a mechanic watching an engine perform exactly as designed. They saw me as a target to be purged. I saw them as raw materials. And a screaming man is the best bait in the world. I turned and faded deeper into the dark, leaving him to call his friends to their deaths. Chapter 13. The Last Signal. The Vox Tower stood like a broken finger pointing accusingly at the sky. It was the highest point in the sector, a skeleton of girders and antenna arrays stripped bare by the bombardment. The wind up here was savage, screaming through the metal lattice with a voice that sounded like tearing metal. I climbed. My hands were raw. My gloves shredded every rung of the ladder, sending a jolt of agony through my wounded leg. But pain was irrelevant. Pain was just telemetry data, telling me my body was still functioning. I wasn't climbing to find a rescue beacon. I wasn't climbing to see the sun. I was climbing to turn this tower into the loudest microphone the planet had ever seen. I reached the observation deck. It was a glass-walled blister hanging over the abyss, the windows blown out the floor slick with rain and oil. A single stormtrooper stood guard by the primary console, his back to me, staring out at the burning city. He was scanning the horizon, looking for the survivor, never expecting the survivor to be 10 feet behind him. I didn't announce myself. I didn't offer a challenge. I drew my combat knife, the blade dulled by the surgery I had performed on myself, but still sharp enough for this. I moved. Silence is a discipline, but violence is a language. I stepped into his shadow. My left hand clamped over his vocabulator grill, stifling his shout. My right hand drove the knife into the gap between his helmet and his gorget. There was a sickening crunch of ceramide on bone, a spasm of armored limbs, and then he went heavy. I held him up as he died, not out of respect, but because the sound of a falling body carries. I lowered him gently to the floor. He stared up at the ceiling, his red lenses fading to black. I didn't look at him. I stepped over him. He was just an obstacle I had cleared. I approached the console. It was a mess of sparking wires and shattered dials, but the primary transmitter was intact. The machine spirit was dormant, sleeping in the cold metal. I woke it up. I jammed the connector of the Major's data slate into the hardline port. The screen flared to life, casting a ghostly green pallor over my face. I didn't key in the emergency frequency. I didn't key in the Munitorum logistical channel. I keyed in the open frequency, the unencrypted galaxy-wide band used by commercial haulers, rogue traders, and listening posts in 3 sectors. It was the frequency of the public. It was the frequency of truth. I selected the file Operation Silent Night. I hit upload. The progress bar appeared, a thin red line inching across the screen. 1%. 5%. I wasn't calling for help. I was broadcasting a confession. I was sending the flight paths of the black ships, the timeline of the artillery strikes, the biological readings of the artifact, and the kill orders signed by the Inquisitor. I was sending proof that the Imperium had murdered 5,000 of its own loyal sons to cover up a mistake. The Voxcaster on the dead trooper's belt suddenly crackled to life. It wasn't the static. It was him. Anomaly detected in Sector Prime, the voice of Sterilizer Alpha hissed. High band transmission initiating. Source the tower. There was a pause, a cold, calculating silence. He's not signaling for extraction, the voice said, and for the first time I heard a flicker of something that sounded like genuine surprise. He is broadcasting the data. All units, converge on the tower. Kill him before that transmission hits orbit. I looked at the screen. 15%. I looked at the door. I could hear them coming. The heavy thud of boots on the metal stairs, the whine of charging hellguns. They were coming to silence me, but they were too late. The signal was already out of the bottle. I pulled the dead trooper's hellgun from his grip and checked the charge. Full. Come and get it, I whispered to the door. But you're going to have to listen to me first. Chapter 14, Last Stand. The door to the observation deck was thick plasteel reinforced against high-altitude winds and orbital debris, but it was buckling. They were using melta-charges on the hinges. I could see the metal glowing cherry red, bubbling and hissing as the superheated gas ate through the integrity of the seal. I stood behind the central console using the heavy machinery as cover. The dead stormtrooper's hellgun was heavy in my hands, the power cable humming against my arm. I checked the screen. 88%. The data packet was heavy, burdened with high-resolution scans and encrypted logs. It was crawling. Outside, the gantry vibrated with the heavy tread of armored boots. The entire tower felt like it was shivering, anticipating its own death. The Vox unit on the console, the one built into the tower's mainframe, lit up. It bypassed the encryption I had set up. Sterilizer Alpha wasn't just knocking on the door, he was already inside the system. "Cease transmission," the voice commanded. It was perfectly calm. It sounded like a doctor diagnosing a terminal illness. "You are attempting to propagate corrupted data. This is a logic error unit, Kylan. You believe you are a hero making a stand. You are incorrect. You are an unpaid invoice. You are a clerical error in a ledger that has already been balanced." I laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound that tasted of blood and ash. I looked at the screen. 92%. An invoice, I repeated into the open mic. "Is that what 5,000 men are to you, a rounding error?" The voice replied, instantly devoid of hesitation. "Yes. The Imperium runs on calculus, not sentiment. Your regiment was spent currency. You are trying to spend it twice. Open the door, and we will make the liquidation quick." I looked at the satchel charges I had rigged to the primary structural supports, bundles of crack grenades and promethium fuel cells, wired to a single detonator in my left hand. "Come and collect," I said. The door exploded. It didn't swing open. It disintegrated, blown inward by a concussive blast that rattled my teeth in my skull. Smoke poured in thick and acrid, followed immediately by the red beams of Hellgun fire. They cut through the smoke, scorching the console, shattering the glass screens around me. I rose up, squeezing the trigger of the Hellgun, spraying coherent light blindly into the breach. I heard a grunt, the sound of armor cracking, but they kept coming. They were a wall of black ceramite and red eyes, unstoppable, inevitable. I didn't look at them. I looked at the screen. 99%. Upload complete. The text flashed green, a beautiful, vibrant color in a gray world. The data was gone. It was out in the void, bouncing off relays, burning itself into the hard drives of listening posts across the subsector. The truth couldn't be killed now. I dropped the gun. I looked at the lead stormtrooper, Sterilizer Alpha, as he stepped through the smoke, his power maul crackling with lethal energy. He raised the weapon. I raised the detonator. "Delete this," I whispered. I pressed the button. The world turned white, then silent. Chapter 15. Another hell. I expected fire. I expected the cold, crushing embrace of the warp, or the infinite nothingness of the void. I did not expect the smell of lemon-scented disinfectant. It was a sharp, chemical sting that pulled me out of the darkness, dragging my consciousness back into a body I had tried very hard to destroy. I opened my eyes. The light was blinding, pure, sterile white lumens positioned directly above my face. I wasn't in a trench. I wasn't in a ruin. I was lying on a biobed in a room that looked less like a hospital and more like a laboratory. The walls were polished chrome, reflecting the distorted image of a man wrapped in synth skin bandages. The air hummed with the aggressive efficiency of high-grade life support systems. I tried to sit up, but the restraints held me fast. Heavy leather straps bound my chest and legs to the table. I tried to lift my right arm to shield my eyes from the glare. Nothing happened. I sent the command lift arm, but the limb didn't respond. I turned my head, the muscles in my neck screaming in protest. Where my right arm should have been, there was only a neat, cauterized stump, capped with a metal port that blinked with a soft blue light. The explosion hadn't vaporized me. It had just taken a piece. I stared at the missing limb, waiting for the panic to set in, but I felt nothing. The drugs pumping through the tubes in my neck had chemically castrated my fear. I was calm. I was lucid. I was a broken toy that had been glued back together. A servo skull drifted into my field of vision, its anti-grav engine purring softly. It hovered over me, its optical lens zooming in and out with a wet, clicking sound. It wasn't checking to see if I was okay. It was checking the telemetry of my vitals, logging the data to a server somewhere. Subject stabilized. It chirped in binary. Neural integration at 94%. I wasn't a patient. I was a project. I closed my eyes, wishing for the silence of the tower, wishing for the end I had earned. But the Imperium does not waste resources, and apparently I was no longer trash. I was salvage. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. It wasn't a stormtrooper. It was a figure draped in heavy robes of crimson velvet, embroidered with gold thread that caught the harsh light. An inquisitor. But not the one who had ordered the purge. This one wore a different sigil, a variation of the rosette that spoke of a different ordo, a different political faction within the labyrinth of Terra's power. He walked to the side of my bed, looking down at me with the detached curiosity of a man inspecting a rare insect. He didn't look angry. He looked pleased. "You caused quite a mess, operator," he said. His voice was smooth, cultured, the voice of a man who had never eaten corpse starch in his life. "That data burst of yours, it was very loud. It made it all the way to the sector capital. It made my rivals in the Ordo Hereticus look very incompetent." He ran a gloved finger along the metal rail of my bed. They wanted to bury the truth about the artifact. "You dug it up. You gave me the weapon I needed to destroy them in the High Court." I stared at him. The realization hit me harder than the shrapnel. I hadn't exposed the truth to save the memory of the dead. I hadn't triggered a revolution. I had just provided ammunition for a political squabble between two powerful men I would never meet. The deaths of 5,000 soldiers, the suffering, the betrayal. It was all just leverage in a game of high-stakes bureaucracy. "Let me die," I rasped. My voice was a wreck, scorched by smoke and screaming. The Inquisitor smiled. It was a cold, thin expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Die? Oh no, Kalen. Death is for the useless. You survived a purge, a sterilization team, and a demolition charge. You have a unique talent for refusing to be deleted." He tapped the metal port on my shoulder stump. "The Imperium has enough martyrs. What we lack are effective instruments. You have proven to be a very durable tool." He turned and walked away, his robe sweeping the floor. "Get some rest. We have a lot of work to do." Chapter 16, Asset X9. They fitted the prosthetic 3 hours later. It wasn't a hand. The Imperium has the technology to graft biological limbs to grow vat-cloned tissue that mimics the touch and warmth of the original. But they didn't waste that on me. They bolted a heavy blackened steel armature into the socket of my shoulder. It ended not in fingers, but in a modular hardpoint, a universal interface for weapons, data spikes, and cutting tools. I looked at it in the reflection of the med bay wall. It was ugly. It was industrial. It was honest. It was exactly what I had become. A component. A thing designed to interface with the machinery of war, stripped of the pretense of humanity. The nerves connected with a sharp electric jolt, and for the first time I felt the cold metal as if it were my own skin. I flexed the mechanism. Whir. Click. It was louder than my heartbeat. Then came the mask. The attendant, a silent servitor with its mouth sewn shut, held it out to me. It was a solid plate of plasteel, featureless, save for the glowing red tactical lenses and the Vox grill where the mouth should be. It was a rebreather, a comms unit, and a prison all in one. I took it with my remaining flesh hand. I looked at the inside of the mask. It smelled of recycled air and oil. Putting it on was the final act of the funeral. As the seals hissed shut and the locking clamps engaged around the back of my skull, Kalen ceased to exist. The man who collected dog tags, who felt guilt, who tried to expose the truth. He was suffocated behind the ceramic plate. The air I breathed now was filtered, scrubbed of all scent, scrubbed of the smell of the dead. I understand the nature of the galaxy now. I used to think there was a choice between obedience and freedom. I was wrong. There is only a choice between being a victim and being a weapon. The soldiers of the 104th were victims. They died, confused, betrayed, and erased. They were fuel burned in an engine they didn't understand. I refused to be fuel, so I became the piston. I became the gear. I am no longer fighting for the Emperor, or for the truth, or for revenge. I am fighting because that is what I was built to do. The Inquisitor calls me a useful asset. He thinks he owns me. He is half right. He owns the weapon. But the finger on the trigger, that is still mine. I walked out of the medbay and onto the flight deck of the Inquisitor's vessel. The stars outside were cold and distant, indifferent to the suffering revolving around them. The data slate on my wrist integrated directly into my new arm, pinged with a new objective. Mission infiltration. Target Hive City Tertium. Designation Asset X9. I read the name. X9. It didn't sting. It didn't hurt. It felt clean. Kalen was a ghost. X9 is a reality. This is the last entry in this log. If you have been listening, hoping for a happy ending, hoping that one man can change the rot of the Imperium, then you haven't been paying attention. There are no happy endings here. There is only survival. And the price of survival is everything that makes you human. I am checking my weapons now. The chamber is clear. The battery is full. The silence is waiting for me, but I am no longer afraid of it. I am the thing that makes the noise. You would have done the same. You know you would. End recording.